In this lesson, we'll revisit ordered and unordered lists and explore ways in which cascading style sheets can change the presentation of those unordered and ordered lists. To get started, take a look in the Chapter 6 folder and find the file lesson_04.htm and open that file in your HTML editor. I'm going to drag that file onto TextEdit, which is my HTML editor, and release, and that will open the file. You can also use Open under the File menu and browse to the file on your computer. Looking at this file, we can see that there's a simple CSS rule governing the presentation of the page by modifying the body tag, and there are two unordered and two ordered lists inside this page. Before we get started, I'll open the file in Firefox to see what the page looks like by launching the browser and under the File menu selecting Open, and in the Chapter 6 folder find lesson_04, select it and click Open, and we can see our bulleted lists. I'll decrease the size of my browser window and move it over to the right of my HTML file, and I'll close down my Finder window so I only see these two files, or my HTML file and my browser window. And now what we'll do is explore ways that we can use style sheets and predefined properties to modify the presentation of these lists. Now, as you can see in the web browser, by default, the web browser is displaying a circle as the bullet point for the first two unordered lists. But let's suppose that I don't want circles to be displayed. I'd like squares to be displayed for these bullet points. We can do that easily by creating a rule to modify an instance of the UL tag. And we've previously seen when we did that we could use a class and then apply that class whenever we want, so that those elements that we tag with that class inherit the changes that we'd like to see. So, taking in mind the desire to have these bullet points appear as squares rather than circles, I'll create a new class inside my style element, which I'm highlighting in blue, and to do so I'll position my mouse after the closing bracket of my body rule, and I'll define the name of a class which I wish to have modify one of my unordered lists. In this case, I'll name that class ul dot for class, square, bullet, points, open curly bracket, and then I'll type a closing curly bracket so that I don't forget. I'll then hit my up arrow key on my keyboard and tab over once, and I'll type the property name list-style-type and specify a value of square, and then type a semicolon. I'll then save my work from the File menu, switch over to my browser and hit Reload. And I can see nothing happens. The reason is that we haven't attached this class to any instance of an unordered list. We've seen in a previous lesson that we can do that when we use the class attribute on a tag. So to have something to cross-reference and observe the change, I'll leave the first unordered list alone, but I'll add a class attribute to the opening UL tag of my second unordered list, which we've done before, and I'll type that attribute, class, equals, quote, quote, and then within the quotes, I'll put the name of my class. The class name that I defined was square bullet point, which I'm highlighting in blue, and to make sure that I spell it correctly, I'll copy that into memory, and then I'll paste that inside the quotes so that it's the value associated with this class attribute on our unordered list tag. I'll then save my work and switch over to my web browser and hit reload again. Now I can see the bullet points show up as squares and not circles. Well, let's turn our attention to our ordered lists for a moment. We can see our ordered lists are showing up with 1, 2, and 3. Well, let's say I didn't want that. Let's say I wanted a different character set. Let's say I wanted Roman numerals instead of 1, 2, and 3. As we did a moment ago, I'm going to define a class to govern the presentation of my ordered list. So I'll type OL and the class name upper dash Roman dash text, because that makes sense to me. Open curly bracket, hit the return key a couple of times, close curly bracket. And I'll tab over once, and then I'll type the property name, list, style, type, colon, except this time I'll specify a value of upper dash Roman, and then I'll put a semicolon. Looks like I missed the ER in my upper. I just have up Roman text, so I'll put that ER in there. This class name can be anything. This just makes sense to me to name the class in a way reflective of the property that I wish to assign to it. Having named this class upper Roman text, I'll select that text and copy it into memory only so that I don't make a mistake when I assign my class selectively to the ordered list which I wish to format. Like I did before with my unordered list, I'll modify the second ordered list so that I can observe a comparison in my web browser. For the second ordered list, I'll type space, class, equals, quote, quote. Inside the quotes for this class, I'll then paste the class name which I have in memory, upper Roman text, and under the File menu, I'll select Save. I'll switch over to my web browser and hit refresh or reload, and I can see that that second ordered list is now displaying Roman numerals instead of Western European digits. Now let's say we want to get a little bit more fancy. Let's say we don't want to use bullet points for our unordered lists. Let's go back to our unordered list and change these into images. Inside the Chapter 6 folder, you should find an image called bullet point underscore blue arrow. Let's say that instead of the circles, which we see in our first unordered list, we'd like to see those blue arrows instead. So what we'll do is we'll define another style by declaring a class and then applying that class to that unordered list. I'll switch back over to my HTML document, and inside the style element, hit the return key a few times on my keyboard to give myself some more space. And now I'll define a class for an unordered list. Type the period key, because we're defining a class, and then type the name arrow bullet points, and then an open curly bracket and a closing curly bracket. Again, this class name can be anything, which I'm highlighting in blue, but it's always a good idea to pick a class name that represents the effect that you're applying with that class. I'll then position my mouse within the curly brackets, hit the tab key once, and instead of list style type, I'll type the property list style image, colon, and then the value will be the CSS syntax to refer to an external image, which in this case is URL, open parentheses, and then the name of our file, which is bullet point underscore blue arrow .gif. Then close parentheses and semicolon. From the File menu, I'll select Save, to make sure I don't lose my work. Then I'll scroll down a bit, and I'll copy this class name into memory using my mouse by clicking and dragging to highlight the name in blue. Then I'll edit and copy that name into memory, only to make sure I don't misspell it. Then I'll come down and find the first unordered list, which in my web browser you can see here at the top of the page. And I'll apply that class to this unordered list by positioning my cursor inside the unordered list and pressing the space bar on my keyboard and typing class equals quote quote, and within the quote I'll paste my class name. Now if I save my work from the File menu, or Command-S, Control-S on the PC, switch over to your browser, and hit Reload or Refresh, you can see the bullet points are now looking up that external image and displaying it instead of circles.